Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to some of you. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Nate Graham, and I am the Associate for the Energy, Climate Change, and Extractive Industries program at the Inter-American Dialogue. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by a distinguished keynote speaker, Acting Assistant Secretary of Energy for International Affairs, Andrew Light, and a diverse panel of private sector representatives to discuss how private companies can propel the energy transition in Latin America and how some are already doing so. The energy transition is gathering pace in the region, as in many parts of the world, as the consequences of allowing climate change to continue become ever more evident and dire. At this point, 15 Latin American and Caribbean countries have submitted new or updated nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, and companies are driving emissions reductions in their own way by directly cutting their own emissions and reshaping their business models to accelerate the shift to clean technologies and mitigate climate-related risks to their business. As our keynote session will discuss, the United States has reemerged as a potential partner on climate action for the private sector in the region, with finance and R&D capabilities to mobilize and a foreign policy emphasizing climate, as demonstrated by last week's Leaders Summit on Climate. At the summit, President Joe Biden also announced an ambitious new target of cutting US emissions by half relative to 2005 levels by 2030. And as our panel will illustrate, many companies, ranging from asset managers to utilities to energy companies historically focused on oil and gas, have their own corporate emissions reduction targets and are diversifying into a wide range of technologies in renewable power, energy storage, low carbon fuels, carbon capture, electric mobility, hydrogen, and other areas. The goals of this event are to explore the steps the private sector is taking to drive the energy transition in Latin America, identify the potential that remains untapped, and exchange ideas on how to partner with the US and policymakers in the region to catalyze clean energy adoption. We would like to thank our Energy and Resources Committee members for their support, which made this event possible. And we invite you to join the conversation by submitting questions through the Q&A function in Zoom or by sending an email to meetings@thedialogue.org. With that, I will pass it over to the director of the Dialogue's Energy, Climate Change, and Extractive Industry program, Lisa Vicidi, to kick off our keynote session.
Thank you so much, Nate. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us wherever you're joining from. I'll start off by moderating the session, the keynote session, with Acting Assistant Secretary Andrew Light. All of the speakers' full bios are on our website, so I'll just be brief in my introduction. Acting Assistant Secretary Light leads the Office of International Affairs as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. During the second half of the Obama administration, he served as Senior Advisor and India Counselor to the U.S. Special Envoy on Climate Change in the State Department, as well as a Staff Climate Advisor in Secretary of State John Kerry's Office of Policy Planning. Outside of government, he's been a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a distinguished senior fellow at the World Resources Institute, where he led high-level climate and energy dialogues between non-governmental US participants and counterparts in India, China, and the European Union. And he's co-authored over 20 major policy reports on clean energy and climate cooperation, governance, and economic opportunity. Today, obviously, he has a very broad global experience on climate change and clean energy. Today, I'm going to ask him to give us some kind of overall sense of the policies of the Biden administration, but also talk specifically about cooperation with Latin America. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. I will just go right into the first question. So I wanted to ask you, what role do you foresee private companies playing in the Biden administration's goal of advancing the energy transition abroad while also creating clean American jobs at home? So, how do you kind of overall see the role of the private sector, which is obviously critical to this effort? So thanks again for joining us.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lisa, to you and your organization and my co-panelists. It's an honor to be with all of you today. President Biden, as some of you may know and may have tuned in last night, addressed a joint session of Congress. And he repeated there something that he said over and over and over again, which is something that I know that Secretary Granholm of the Department of Energy supports. It's certainly something, it's the hymn book that I've been preaching from for 15 years at least on this, is that when we talk about climate change, we talk about climate action, we talk about job creation. So this is at the center. I mean, your question really is, maybe another way of rephrasing the question, or the way I put an answer is, there's absolutely no way that we could make the transformations that this administration in the United States wants to make, or indeed what we need to do globally, without the private sector. It's essential. And that's because and I'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about President Biden's climate summit that he hosted, the Global Leaders Summit last week. We are, I think, at a point we're recognizing that the conversation now is about the opportunity. And the opportunity is immense when we think about what we're going to need to do to transform our economies collectively to hit net zero emissions globally by 2050, which is what we need to do in order to hit the targets under the Paris Agreement. My favorite number, and I repeat this a lot, so forgive me if some of you might have heard me say this before, is 23 trillion. And it is the number, it's the International Finance Corporation did a study in 2016 of only the commitments under the Paris Agreement of the largest 21 developing countries. Now, all of you who know the Paris Agreement know that there were commitments from over 190 countries under the Paris Agreement. This was just unpacking the commitments of the top 21 developing countries out to 2030, the indicative year of their commitments under Paris. And the estimate that they made after unpacking the different sectors, including many countries in Latin America, the different sectors where countries were saying they're going to do this and that on the transportation sector, the building sector, electricity, what have you, that created a $23 trillion investment opportunity by 2030. That is the biggest investment opportunity and the biggest job creation opportunity that we will see in our lifetimes, that our children will ever see, that our grandchildren will ever see. And so it is up to those countries who want to step forward to work in those markets as they are evolving now, who will benefit from them and then create jobs out of them. The United States has not been very much in the business of working towards that opportunity in the last 4 years, but now we certainly are. Everything from my office, where I've created a new office of market development, up to the inner circles of the president in the White House. Latin America is a place where there is so much opportunity. It already has an abundance of clean energy resources, with more than a quarter of the region's primary energy coming from renewables, which is twice the global average already. At the same time, Latin America is highly dependent on fossil fuels to meet its energy needs, which is not, of course, different from most of the rest of the world. There's also a large reliance on hydropower in Latin America, which is good, which is the kind of power we want to generate and the kind we want to see. But we have to recognize that given the changes that are happening in the climate, it is also vulnerable. And so this is where we really need to step up and expand what we're doing on renewable energy, battery storage, at the grid level, and other areas like that. There's one IRENA study from 2020 that suggests that the investments in clean energy sector in Latin America could return between $3 and $8 over the next few decades. I think that's a low number. I think with sufficient outlay of assurances and guarantees from countries such as the United States, that number can go up, because we will see that that is the smart bet. And if you unpack that International Finance Corporation report from 2016, for example, there's really such an amazing array of opportunities that interconnect the region, for example, in the transportation sector, where we really do expect that Latin America will be a great leader. We already collaborate significantly with countries across the region, including Chile, Brazil, Mexico. We're trying to expand all of our energy dialogues we do with every partner in every country in the region. And we'll be looking to do that and reaching out to you from my office to make sure that our joint aspirations together, that in a region which has been so progressive in its ambition, its climate ambition and its clean energy ambition, and its ability to work with countries around the world to make that happen and create a safe and secure investment environment, is one where we actually can create the conditions where the private sector can take advantage of that massive $23 trillion opportunity, which is only an opportunity that the private sector that is one where that can be seriously engaged with is through the private sector.
Great. So a follow-up question on something that you said about the role of the private sector. Do you, is your hope that there would be US companies exporting technologies to Latin America and investing more in Latin America? And are there any sort of specific, if so, are there specific initiatives where you'll try to, expand those opportunities for US companies?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is going to be a whole of government endeavor by the United States. The Department of Energy on the technology side, the Department of Commerce, the Department of State, the Development Finance Corporation, the Export-Import Bank of the United States. That is something that we really want to focus on. We want to demonstrate the prospect that the vast majority of our bilateral and multilateral cooperation around the world creates jobs in the countries where we're investing, and it creates jobs in the United States. That's one of the main ways we're actually going to be able to get over the unfortunate divide we've seen in the United States on the reality of everything from the reality of climate change to the solution set that we need for it. And so it's absolutely going to be something that we're going to be working towards. But it goes further, I think, than just simply trying to find markets for US exports. It goes with co-development of solutions. And this co-development of solutions will happen on the innovation side. And one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I'll go ahead and jump to one thing that we announced at the summit last week, is the United States agreed to be the host of the 2022 combined ministerial meeting of the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation. Two signature projects with altogether about 30 countries involved in them that the United States launched under the Obama administration, the Clean Energy Ministerial under Secretary Chu out of the Department of Energy, and Mission Innovation under Secretary Moniz in the Department of Energy, which really brings together these collaborative platforms where we work together to try to create the technologies of the future. And that is one then where we can imagine that we're all going to see a rising tide as we are then creating those technologies and then looking to the larger export market in the rest of the world, which is far larger even than this hemisphere. So this is, I think, this is the kind of thing that we want to make sure that we work on, that we have secure partners in the region. And I know that already we do that. In fact, I was on a 2-hour call with the Clean Energy Ministerial parties today about launching our new, what we call Clean Energy Ministerial 3.0, which will be at the summit this year, which will be hosted by Chile. And there we will see, I think, a real good step forward in how we use those platforms to advance cooperation throughout the region.
And when will the Clean Energy Ministerial be held? Will it be in person or a virtual event?
The 2021 ministerial meeting that Chile is hosting will be a virtual event. Anyone from Chile is going to be really mad at me because I don't have the dates exactly in my head. It's a very crowded international calendar. I believe it's late May. And that's a combined event, but you can Google it right now and correct me or put it in the chat if you know, and help me out. Then the United States is committed to hosting the next Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation combined ministerial, where, if you don't know these platforms, Clean Energy Ministerial focuses more on the near-term deployment side of things, Mission Innovation, the longer term. Let's kind of get the technologies of the future that we're going to need to create net zero off the ground. And so we are committed to hosting the 2022 ministerial in the third quarter of 2022, and we hope very much so that things are better and that we can have that in person somewhere in the United States to be determined. And then after that, the government of India is committed to hosting the 2023 combined ministerial. And I think it's a very powerful connection. If you think about that sequence of Chile this year, right, the United States in 22, the India in 23, you're really talking about, just think about this combined appetites for not only the markets, but the real power of the innovation, expertise, and collaboration that's possible by making sure that those three are synced up and work well together. It's very exciting.
And speaking of innovation, what are the technologies that you think in the DOE are most important for, trying to develop, for providing some sort of support for R&D? What are you all prioritizing? And are there any you think specifically are promising for partnerships with the private sector in Latin America?
Yeah, quite a lot. And I mean, Nate sort of said it at the beginning. So the United States has a new target under the Paris Agreement that we just announced last week at the summit to achieve 50 to 52% reduction in our emissions by 2030. But before that, President Biden was very, very clear that his ambition is to get the United States to net zero by 2050 as well. And then along the way, we also know that he's announced other sectoral targets there, such as a carbon-free electricity sector in the United States, or at least no unabated carbon by 2035. And that is driving a lot of our innovation now, and a lot of it's coming through the Department of Energy. To give you some examples of things that I think would benefit very much in the region, a highlight is the construction phase of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory's Grid Storage Launchpad, which is a $75 million research facility where we'll figure out how to speed up innovation and deployment of grid scale energy storage technologies. This is absolutely, excuse me, where that is absolutely essential to move renewables into a position where they can take up the role that we see baseload power playing right now, which most countries get from fossil energy still, but still nuclear, which we're also absolutely investing more in and hoping to do more outreach in the region in strong communication with our friends in Brazil about the expansion of their nuclear portfolio there. We have something called the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy, which is a special part of the Department of Energy created again under the Obama administration that really focus on investment and innovation side of that. They have a program called Scale Up, $70 million to support the scaling up of high risk and potentially disruptive new technologies in a good way across the full spectrum of energy possibilities. We have a number of opportunities with our national labs. The US has 17 national labs that were part of the Department of Energy family that are looking for opportunities for collaboration in Latin America in a series of strategic partnership projects. And these often result in the transfer of technology from the public to the private sector. And many of these partnerships allow private sector representatives across our different laboratory facilities to either directly or indirectly participate in the transfer of those technologies to make more things possible. In Latin America, Brazil and Chile have ongoing partnerships with our Argonne National Laboratory, our Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and our Fermi Laboratory, and it goes kind of on and on. One of the things that was alluded to in the deliverables last week when Secretary Granholm co-chaired the innovation session for the summit, which was on the second day of the summit on the 23rd. It was the morning session there with six leaders in the world and a lot of great representatives from the private sector. And one of the things there that was announced is that that we are going to be seeing fairly soon a rollout of some very concentrated cross-cutting budgetary cross-cutting work in the Department of Energy to really create moonshot-like initiatives on particular technologies to achieve particular benchmarks, like hitting a certain price for hydrogen in the future, and again, cutting in half the price of solar energy. All these things which we think will definitely find quite active partnerships in Latin America.
That's very interesting. And I mean, you referenced the summit a few times. Were there any other, kind of major takeaways that will in some way shape the work that you're doing with Latin America, other than the ones that you've already mentioned?
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, overall in the summit, and President Biden, said it best last night in his joint address to Congress, is that the real feeling that we had coming out of the summit is that we had reached an inflection point here. We had reached an inflection point where and I've been involved in climate discussions since there were climate discussions, so quite a while, and internationally. And the unfortunate truth is that we, for too many decades, although it's completely understandable, this was too often a finger pointing exercise. Who has to pay the most, right, to deal with the problem? But I think now, and I think we really saw that from the remarks from leaders last week and the different sessions that were held in climate security, in climate adaptation, on resilience and security and all these other issues, innovation and the economic opportunity, which was the last session of the meeting, is that there was a pivot from, I think, the majority of parties towards the opportunities that could come here. And this is something that we've seen from so many Latin American countries over the years in the halls of the climate negotiations, through to all of these other different smaller multilateral or mini-lateral initiatives that have been created around short-lived climate pollutants, right, or reducing emissions in the aviation or the shipping sectors or things like that. We're really starting to see a turn there. And that's a positive turn. And I think that was the top line that I took away from the summit. But among the other kinds of things that we particularly announced there that I think would be of interest to the region, the Department of Energy launched 6 distinct initiatives itself. And if you can go to the White House website or just Google the White House fact sheet from the summit, you'll see a range of some 20, 30 initiatives that were launched across the interagency, where we've already started to partner with particular countries on new initiatives, including things to try to work through. Oh, and someone put up, yes, the Clean Energy Ministerial is May 31st to June 6th. So thank you very much, Angelica Ruiz, to everyone for finding that for me. All right, moving on. We, for example, launched a net zero producers forum, really aimed at economies who are oil exporters and oil producers, aimed at everything from methane abatement to carbon capture and sequestration, and making that a reality that can actually work and help countries not only to abate the emissions they still have from the fossil energy, but even turned it into usable products, which is a long-term dream but not yet a reality, and as well as trying to find out ways to diversify economies for countries who really feel kind of locked in to one particular sector or one or two particular sectors in the fossil arena for what they do. And these are going to be open. We started with a few countries to launch them, but these will be open for other parties in the region to join. We did the same thing with the new program that we've started on working on creating originally domestic program to create a platform to provide more secure renewable power sources for vulnerable small island countries. This is something we started domestically with Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands in the aftermath of the terrible, devastating hurricane season of a few years ago. And now we're going to globalize that and make it something that we can actually use in combination with some other announcements that were made from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration and the Department of State to really enhance possibilities for island resilience and doing that. And we've also worked on work with power sector operators. So announcing a new program, GPST, that's run under the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which is really where we're going to help to transfer knowledge from countries that already have a fairly high degree of penetration of renewables onto their grid to those countries who aim to do it. And so I think that's a consortium, which again is open to anyone who would like to join in on it and move forward and try to help with that incredibly important hurdle, because it's one thing we want is the commitment to more penetration of renewables onto national and interconnected regional grids out to 2030 and beyond. But we know that this poses a problem in terms of making sure that's done efficiently, making sure it doesn't inadvertently drive up the availability of power or the cost of power, and making sure that it's something that can be built on into the future, and find ways you can do that to combine it with transportation systems and other things to really create an all-encompassing net zero power system for other parties.
Very interesting. Lots of interesting initiatives. And I was wondering, how you would sort of characterize the response that you received from the other countries in terms of, this very new and different way that the US is approaching climate change under President Biden and taking more of a lead, and, how were countries receptive? What do you think the other countries sort of hoped to get from the US and out of the relationship?
Well, if I had the time or the capacity, what I would want to do is go through the entire summit and cut like a sort of I don't know what you would call a sort of a short reel or something, right, of the openings of just about every single person who spoke. There were about 40 leaders at the summit. There are other countries that were represented at the ministerial level. I think I can't remember a one that didn't begin with saying, we're so glad the United States is back. We're so glad the United States is back in the Paris Agreement. And look, we know that the United States was pulling in the other direction in the last 4 years and not being helpful on this agenda. This is one of the reasons that President Biden made this a day one priority to rejoin the Paris Agreement. And then probably in the first 100 days, which was incredibly fast, not only to produce this global summit, which is one thing, but to also be able to put on the table a new emissions commitment from the United States, which is the only way you're going to get other countries to consider enhancing their ambition. If we step up and show you what we're going to do now by 2030, after being on the sidelines at best for the last 4 years, and then also putting forward our announcements on how we're going to be creating more opportunities for finance, right, through the Development Finance Corporation and other development institutions that we have in the United States government also at the summit. This happened very fast. It was pretty grueling to do all this in 100 days. But we wanted to do it. We did it with all sense of humility for, again, helping to lead the world with so many parties in this region on creating the Paris Agreement and then abruptly turning back on that. We had no choice, frankly, other than to come strong in. And we were really grateful for the strong reception and the welcoming back the international community provided. And I know we've got a lot to prove, but I think we can do it. And I think last week was a really good start, what I see as a very exciting international year through the G7, through the G20, through the SEM mission innovation ministerials out to the COP in November in Glasgow in 2026. And then we've got to pick up, right away after all the great partnerships we're going to create as we move forward on ambition and then make them work. So we're creating a lot for ourselves to do, but I feel confident that we have a community of nations that wants to see success on this. And that's the most encouraging thing.
That's great. Well, I know we're about out of time. If you have time, I'll ask you one more quick question.
Sure.
Just to bring it back to the private sector issue. I mean, you mentioned, for example, Latin America has a lot of oil producing countries that are looking how they can make this transition, how they can adapt in the energy transition. You mentioned, methane, carbon capture, sequestration. Just to bring it back to the private sector, what do you see as the role of companies in these initiatives that you're working with Latin America on?
We can't do it without the companies. And it comes from the very basics of understanding, transparency, reporting. We will rely on so let's just take the gas sector there. Bad news is that there's a lot of dirty gas out there in the world, and some of it from the United States, and we're the first to admit that. And it's something that we've got to double down and show how we can clean up the leakage and flaring from our gas sector as well. So we're committed to that. But it's also one of the easiest to abate sectors when it comes to methane emissions globally, which is an enormous problem and something we really, not only is something we absolutely have to get a handle on in order to meet our overall climate goals, but we can actually, because of the way the atmospheric physics and chemistry work, if we get rapid reduction in methane emissions, we actually get a faster return, right, on temperature abatement. So we actually have a faster impact on temperature because methane, the way that it warms the atmosphere and the overall climatological system, it's shorter lived than carbon dioxide. And so that's an amazing opportunity there. But in order to get there, we have to have cooperation from companies, because we all know that the environment for being able to do national inventories on greenhouse gases is highly variegated across the world. And it's something the United States wants to help countries to improve with respect to their in situ capacity to monitor their own emissions and do studies and sort of make sure that they can report accurately. But in the nearer term, we really rely on companies not only to work with us on understanding where it is, what they're sort of how we can clean up help them to clean up their gas supply, but then of course in sort of adopting and being early leaders, and again, in a very variegated regulatory environment across different countries, even within countries, to really kind of adopt the stronger forward-leaning profile on that and work with us on it. And I think what they will find is they will have a product that's frankly more attractive in those parts of the world where gas is still being used, because countries are going to be looking for the cleanest sources that they can around there. That's just one example. We could talk the same way about oil. We could talk about coal in this way as well. But in very many ways, you just cannot simply do this with top-down regulation alone. You have to have the cooperation of the private sector. There are already so many companies that are forward-leaning and real champions in this area. And we just want to create the conditions that can help them to succeed more, working with other countries in the region, and also conditions where they create a race to the top in their community to see who can do it better.
Right, right. Well, thank you for sharing that. This has been really interesting. On behalf of the Inter-American Dialogue, I really want to thank you for your time. There are many more issues to discuss, so we'll have to invite you back after the next major meeting, which now we know is coming up very soon on May 31st. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And we're going to move to the next panel, and actually many of the issues discussed are going to be discussed on the next panel as well. So I would like to just briefly introduce the speakers. Again, their bios are on our website, and I want to get right into the discussion because we have a lot of interesting speakers today. Angelica Ruiz is Senior Vice President for Latin America and country head of Mexico for BP. Jean-Michel Laverne is President and CEO of Total E&P Americas. Julian Nebreda is President for South America of the AES Corporation. And Mario Fernandez is Head of Latin American Energy Principal Investments at Macquarie Capital. So in this session, I'll direct an initial question to each of the speakers, a second round of questions, and then we're going to have some time at the end for questions from the audience. So if you think of a question as you're listening, please go ahead and put it in the chat or email it to us. So Angelica, let's start with you. As probably a lot of our audience has seen and is aware, BP outlined a very ambitious plan to reach net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. So how does that guide investment decisions today for your existing operations, as well as, looking ahead, new acquisitions or divestments? How does that apply? How do you apply that to Latin America specifically? And what oil and gas assets then become most attractive in Latin America in a low carbon scenario? And are there some that are no longer viable?
Thanks very much, Lisa, for introducing me, and thank you for inviting me and sharing this panel with all my colleagues here. So I think, as most of you have heard, BP is leading in its own way this transformation, and very important just to go back to where we want to see us in the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And again, just coming back to what the Deputy Ministry said, I think what BP is doing is just redefining their strategy and setting new targets for the next 10, 20, and 30 years. It's a big change, and I think it's worth just saying that the way we have worked for 100 years and, well, whole BP, it's just a breakthrough in terms of the change from being an international oil company into an integrated energy company. And the reason for doing that is one of the things I was already mentioned is climate change and climate action. I think that is the big problem that we're living in the world. And thus, it makes us redefine the way we will be working in the future. One of the big changes we see, and I'm going to move into Latin in a moment, is practically the electrification of the world. I think that is something that is unavoidable, and to get there, that's where the energy transition takes a very relevant place, because we're going to be producing energy, but in a different way. And that means that we all have to define our strategies in terms of how we're going to do this. In the case of BP, we are going to do three major pillars of our strategy. One is around electrification. We are going to move from investing most of our capital in hydrocarbons. We're going to do a big shift and invest it in net zero gas and net zero energy. So that's the first change. And we are really making this a pillar, and our goal, we're targeting to reach by 2030, 50 gigas of clean energy. The second one is hydrocarbons. And that's when I'm going to move into Latin America, because that bridges in very nicely to what's happening in Latin America. But we are also redefining our CapEx. And what we're going to do is shift from producing 2.5 million barrels to 1.5 in the next 10 years. And the reason why we're doing this are mainly two. We're going to use part of that CapEx for what I said previously. And then the other part is we're going to move into a strategy of resilient hydrocarbons. And like you've said, and it's been said, I think we all move at different paces. And Latin America, like many other countries in the world, still relies strongly in hydrocarbons. So what we're shifting here is how are we going to be producing these hydrocarbons? Our targets are to become net zero by 2050. And again, a key part of doing this is to measure the way you're going to be doing this, to measure our emissions, CO2 and methane emissions, and be very efficient at doing that. And whilst we continue producing hydrocarbons in Latin America, it's about producing them in a better way with less emissions and considering even values of CO2 in our financials and being very transparent about them. And finally, the other very critical point is CCUS. CCUS, which is carbon storage, is another fundamental part of both the electrification and the production of hydrocarbons. What are the technologies that we're going to be used to capture it? And third, the third pillar is around mobilization and the way customers will be behaving. We have, or we're acknowledging that customers will be changing their behaviors drastically and will play a fundamental role in terms of decisions. So the third part of our strategy is around mobilization and customers. And we're going to be approaching in a much closer way both cities and corporations and partnering up with them around how can we help you make this transition, because it's not only about energy companies reducing their footprint, but it is like Nate also mentioned in the introduction, it's about how can we help industries and cities with new technologies, digitalizations, partner up and together reach those targets, which is around collaboration. So just to close up around Latin America, our strategy remains to keep our assets where we are around hydrocarbons, that is Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina through our non-operating JVs. But then again, pursue this market around electrifications and these huge opportunities around creating power solutions for customers, and mainly focus there in customers such as cement, steel, and heavy transport, and partner up with them and together not only provide energy, but provide solutions that can reach net zero targets. So I know we have limited time, but I hope that gives enough information as to have others complement what I'm saying or add additional ideas. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, that was very helpful, and very new direction and a lot of changes at BP. Well, let me go to Jean-Michel. I also wanted to ask you, could you tell us about the key aspects of Total's strategy to produce cleaner energy sources or other emissions-related activities such as carbon offsets, and specifically, how is that affecting your business in Latin America?
Yes, good morning, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Total is proud to be the company of responsible energy, and clearly as a responsible actor in society, we take the climate change issue as a challenge. And we believe that the climate change will not be successful if oil and gas companies are only part of the problem and not part of the solution. and we want clearly to be part of the solution. And at the same time, we accept the fact that, and I think everybody must realize the fact that we have a twin challenge. On the one hand, is to reduce emissions, and on the other hand, it is to keep supplying more and more energy to the world. And if I take the case of Latin America is still a continent or a subcontinent where not everybody has access to energy, and there is a global need of improving the living conditions of the people of Latin America, and this will come through economic development, and this economic development will require more energy. So our challenge is can be summarized by more energy and less carbon. And so the strategy of Total is organized around these two pillars. Total is going to grow its energy supply to the world. And at the same time, we are going to reduce our emissions associated with this growing energy. So the way we are going to grow our energy supply to the world, and in particular to Latin America, is threefold. One is renewables. Clearly, the 21st century will be the century of electricity. And Total has decided to go into this direction wholeheartedly. And our objective by 2030 is to have developed 100 gigawatts of electricity capacity, with the aim of being one of the top 5 renewable power producer in the world. Because again, if you do something, you do it all the way or you don't. We are going to do that, and I can tell you that today in Latin America, we have solar and wind energy project in Argentina, in Brazil, and we are in the process of responding to call for tenders from the governments of Guyana regarding small-scale energy, solar energy production for isolated villages. And it's an important point that I'd like to mention, which is that we offer customized solution. Not everybody needs a 50 or 100 megawatt project. Some villages are isolated in such a way that it's not economic to build a power line to bring electricity to them from the existing production centers. And so it's important to also provide a customized solution where with solar panels, you can have them have access to basic energy. So that's the first pillar, and it's clearly something we are already developing in Latin America. The second pillar is the promotion of gas. Gas is a fossil energy, but it's clearly cleaner than coal or oil. And we support fully the return of the US administration to the methane emission rules that had been put in place in a previous administration. In fact, it's one of the reasons why Total took the significant step of exiting the API association in the US, because we considered that this association had positions that were not aligned enough with the Paris Agreement. And so we decided to exit this association at the end of last year. And I can tell you that today we have an objective, and we are already at that objective, which is to have methane emissions which are equal or less than 0.1% of the gas that we produce in our operated site. So this is a responsible way of producing gas and making it as clean as possible. And gas has a dual role. One is to supplement renewable energy. We know that renewable, it's not 100% 24/7 for reasons. And until we have developed storage capacities on a large-scale basis, we need to have gas as a complement to the supply of renewable energy. So that's the first one. The second one is that gas can displace progressively part of the hydrocarbon usage or the oil usage which is being done by the consumers. So gas is the second very important axe of expansion of Total. And that's no mystery that we have become already the number 2 LNG supplier in the world. And we are going to keep growing gas. And then the third element is to work on carbon capture and carbon sink. So today we don't have a carbon capture project in effect in Latin America. We have several projects on the way in the Northern Sea, but we have opened a regional R&D hub in Rio de Janeiro with a significant R&D budget, and we are going to work on developing new solutions with regional partners towards carbon capture. The other element is carbon sink. You may know that today there are only 2 in the world which are at net zero already today. One is Bhutan, and the second one is Suriname. And so Suriname today faces the challenge of developing its economy, potential upcoming oil and gas production. And so we need to help Suriname stay a net zero country. And that works through the forest, the fight against forest degradation. And we are today working with the government of Suriname to put in place policies and actions on the ground that will help the country stay net zero in spite of its upcoming economic development and oil and gas production. So at the end of the day, on a global basis, today, Total, or yesterday, if you will, Total was 55% of the energy supply by Total was oil. 40% was gas and 5% was electrons, power. Tomorrow, by 2030, we will be, oil will be down to 30% of what we sell. Gas will be 50%. Electrons will be 15%. And to make it 100%, we will be also selling 5% of renewable fuels like biodiesel. And today it is something we are looking at very actively in connection with Petrobras in Brazil, because this is the largest consumer market in Latin America. And I think there is a great opportunity for developing biodiesel in Latin America. So I will stop there, and we can focus in more detail on some of these elements later on in the discussion.
Great, thank you. And I'm already seeing a couple of very interesting questions from the audience. And I want to turn now to Julian, which has, I think, a bit of a different perspective on these questions. I noted that AES was the first publicly traded US power company to release a climate scenario report in line with the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure recommendations. So I wanted to ask, how did this very important analysis that you did apply to your business in Latin America, which is quite substantial? AES is, a major player in Latin America. So I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for the invite. It's nice to hear that the oil companies are getting into our field, or trying, so going to become a much more competitive market, which is always good. So it's the driver of what we do. So no, let me talk about the climate report. This is the second climate report. We did one in 2008. Now we issue a second one in 2021. And you can read. It's very good read, easy to read. It covers both our exposure to climate risk and our climate commitments. And I would say the most salient element of it is the acceleration of our climate commitments. And I will say the following: when we plan for this, and I will talk a little bit about what we're doing, is that we as a company are planning for a world where the climate action becomes more, you will need stronger or faster climate action every year, where you need to be ready to do more every year. And let's say when we came out, 3 months ago, before the Biden administration came in, we put in a net zero electricity generation worldwide to 2040. Now the US government is setting net zero electricity for 2035. So it tells you, this is a race. So what are we doing in Latin America? Or South America, we'll walk you through, and then we can talk a little about Central America, where we're working very closely with the gas industry because we see gas as a transition. But Latin America, in South America, shows, especially Chile, the challenges. But we're fully renewable, both in Chile and Colombia, both in Brazil and Colombia. And we're continuously investing in renewables. We're fully only investing in renewables today. So as I would say, easy, in a way of these are, mostly hydro. The electricity matrix is mostly hydros. Adding renewables, with big reservoirs, adding renewables is, I would say completely easy, but it's something that can be done. It's not that difficult. Then we have Argentina, which is today, I think we're waiting for regulatory clarity to see how things are going. It is unclear where the government wants to go, what's their view of the private sector, how they want to attract investments. So I will put that. But Chile is probably our biggest challenge in terms of decarbonization. And why? In Chile we had, the characteristics. Chile is a country with a huge renewable potential. The best solar resource in the north, probably one of the best wind resources in the south, very long, a lot of challenges in terms of transmission. We had an issue in Chile when we started this process in 2002. We had 3 gigas. We were the biggest generator in Chile, and we have 3 gigas of coal generation in the country. So we represented roughly 1/3 of the generation of the country, and our generation was mostly coal. And mostly coal contracted long-term with the mining industry. So when we set our goal, hey, how do we prepare for a fully decarbonized system? And we looked at it and we said, and a fully decarbonized system where you cannot commit, if you commit today to a fully decarbonized in 2040, that 2 years from now, you might have to do 2035, and 2 years from now, it's going to be 30. So, in a process that's accelerated. So we set a three-prong approach that I think works, and it has been. The first one was, we need to decouple all our contracts from our thermal capacity. So we went to our customers, talked to them, and negotiated so we could decouple our contracts with our thermal capacity. So we could deliver the energy from renewable sources. And that required major negotiations with our contractors. So in a way, we're putting all our coal capacity, all our thermal capacity in Chile as merchant capacity. That allows us to be more flexible in what we can do with it. And it allows us to decarbonize our customers. The mining industry is into a very, very ambitious decarbonization schedule. So this could help. So we were, the alignment, we're almost done. We set a 5-year goal. We were able to do it. We did it in 2 years. There's few customers that we need to do. So that's the first one. The second one, major deployment of renewables. A huge investment program, originally 3 gigas. Our goal was 3 years over a 4-year period. We're going to do 3 gigas over probably 2.5 years or 3 years. So very, very ambitious program, both wind and solar. And the third one, this is the one I probably would like to talk a little bit more about, is that we knew there are challenges for a renewable system in a country like Chile. Huge potential, but transmission is an issue, and firm capacity is an issue. All the firm capacity in the country, all the inertia, all the voltage support, everything is based on a thermal capacity. So we needed to find a solution for that. And, we have been big investors and developers of battery solutions. From the beginning, we have a big, we've been working very hard on this. So we started developing solutions for this. And we have actually developed 3 solutions that we're putting, in Chile, we're working. One is a virtual reservoir, which is adding batteries to run-of-the-river hydro plants. Run-of-the-river hydro plants have the same issues as, non-conventional renewables. They do not provide firm capacity. They are around 3.5 gigas of run-of-the-river hydro plants in Chile. We created a technology to ensure that we can provide additional capacity to these hydro plants by adding batteries and ensuring that they will get higher, they can extend their capacity, their firm capacity, and they can sell their energy at better points. So that was one. The other one was enhancing our solar projects. And essentially what we did was we did it with our first big solar project with the biggest battery array in South America, which is 112 megawatts for 5 hours. And what you do is we overbuilt our solar panel, put in batteries, store the electricity during the day, the excess electricity during the day, and extended the hours of, this is a simple explanation that requires a lot more work now, and extended the hours of the solar production or the solar up to the peak hours in the day. So, and the second one is batteries for the national grid. There is an opportunity, and we looked at the national grid, and there are a lot of opportunities where we can improve the ability of the system to move wind from the south and solar from the north to the center and all around by adding batteries in the system and improving without adding additional investments except for the batteries, you can actually improve significantly the ability to transfer. So those are our 3 projects. And we think that this is the approach that's going to allow us to accelerate this, the ability to free up, our plans so we can put it. We've already started with the commissioning 2 plans. And we are working with the government to decommission the other ones as they need. Now they're free, so the government can decide when they want them out. And that's what we told them. Hey, you can take them out as soon as you think the system needs it. Investing in technology, in renewables, and helping the government address the firm capacity issue, which is going to be the most difficult part of the transformation in the case of Chile, which is going to be very, very important in order to ensure that we can meet our very ambitious carbon goals. So, and that's what we're working on. We have similar approaches in each of our markets, looking at how we can have a portfolio that can accelerate as our commitments to carbon neutrality become, they accelerate as we move forward. So.
Right. It's very, very complicated in order to make those transitions with these major assets. Well, let me now turn to you, Mario. So, you have a different perspective as an investor in these projects as opposed to, energy producing companies. So I think specifically our audience would be really interested in understanding how climate sustainability and ESG factor into your investment decisions for Latin America. And then how do you measure success? How do you actually measure things like ESG? And do you think that investment decisions in Latin America will be affected by financial risks related to climate change, such as stranded assets, natural disasters, any other types of risks?
Thanks, Lisa, for having me. Yeah, look, it's a very complex question. So let's unpackage it a bit in the context of what it is that Macquarie Capital does. So Macquarie Capital, along with its green investment group, we focus on developing and creating assets and platforms that are going to lead to a greener economy and help the regions which we operate transition to a much cleaner economy, right? So on that, the Green Investment Group has around 30 gigawatts of solar development around the world. We have around 9 gigawatts of operating wind power. We are investing in a lot of different new technologies. Many of the other panelists have mentioned it, but carbon sequestration and capture is one of the things that we're investing in. Renewable natural gas, distributed generation, as well as batteries, right? So across the globe, and especially in North America, we are, proactively trying to create these platforms that could help this economy's transition to a greener economy. Specifically to your point, I think the other point around our business is what we do is create these assets and these platforms for long-term investors, which we eventually sell them off to. And I think it's really hard to ignore the fact that a lot of these long-term institutional investors now have mandates to shift to much greener investments, right? So for us, it's absolutely essential that we keep an eye out, and everything we do goes towards, ESG and energy transition issues, because we know that our eventual customers and clients are going to very much focus on that for the assets and the platforms that we create. Okay, so specifically in Latin America, again, it has been mentioned, but one of the two biggest challenges we see is the dependence on hydro, which Colombia and Brazil are over 60% of the generation is dependent on hydro, and the overdependence on the fact that oil and coal today account for more generation than wind and solar, right? So we do see that as one of the big challenges. How do you create not only generation, but base load that can support these economies? So that's one challenge. I think the other challenge that has also been mentioned, but people don't necessarily focus on it too much, is the lack of transmission infrastructure, right? A lot of these governments just do not have the funds to be able to invest in transmission infrastructure that could lead to optimizing their grid. Not only that, but again, to your question around ESG, it has become much harder to be able to just drive, a transmission line down the Amazon, or, through protected areas, or through different communities without taking that into account. So with those two challenges, right, the transmission and the generation, we've been focused on two things. One is on the renewable front. On the short term, we do see that there is a need for utility scale, especially for our partners and clients around the globe that operate in Latin America, for us to help them shape and structure projects that could help them, transition to a much greener consumption of energy. So we've been working. That's one of the areas we've been focusing on in Brazil and in Chile, and I think that's one thing that we see as our role in helping structure these projects and develop these projects. And then the other one that the other aspect that we see very much relevant in Latin America, and to Jean-Michel's point, is we see gas as a bridge to a much cleaner Latin America, right? I mean, a lot of this in Central America and in South America, coal and fuel oil is still, a very strong source of generation, especially when the hydro fails to meet the needs of the countries. In the past 18 months, both Colombia and Brazil have had some of the lowest levels of hydro reserves that they've seen, right? And that creates, again, a need to fire up those coal and those fuel oil plants, but it also raises the prices for these countries and these communities. So we created a platform called Wavecrest with one of the world's leading experts in LNG and gas to be able to serve some of these underserved markets in Latin America. The reality is Latin America is very close to Texas, obviously, but also the places where gas is produced in Latin America are not easily accessible, right? Venezuela, Argentina, and a little bit Peru. So we do see gas as a bridge to be able to get to a much cleaner Latin America, because the reality is it will not transition from one day to the other. And a lot of these either Europeans or California-based solutions are, won't be able to be implemented. So we need to think very locally and regionally on how we are able to transition, help these economies transition to a greener economy.
Great, thank you. Well, for the second round of questions, I'm gonna switch up the order a little bit, and I'm also gonna incorporate some of the audience questions so we have time to get to them. So Mario, I'm gonna ask you another follow-up question. My question was, what clean technologies and markets do you think are most promising for growth in the region? And are there any clean technologies you're investing in that we might not expect? And I also want to add to that, because you talked about transmission, and there is a question from the audience about that. Are there any specific projects that support electric interconnection and increase reliability in the transmission network that you are investing in that you could tell us about?
Yes, so let me start with the first question, and let me rephrase it a little bit, because I think it's not what it is that we see sort of the low-hanging fruit in LATAM in terms of new technologies, but where we see that there is a tremendous need that is not necessarily being served in the region. So on the new technology front, needless to say, distributed generation is a big focus of ours, because we see it as, again, because these governments will not be able to invest in transmission, right? We saw it in Mexico. Mexico has a lot of generation in the north and not able to evacuate it to the south. As Julian mentioned, Chile, Colombia has a lot of wind generation in the north and is having a lot of issues trying to bring that to the south. So distributed generation, and the holistic solution that it creates, such as batteries and microgrids, is a great need for the region, right? You have places in the Amazon, communities in the Amazon burning lots of diesel to be able to generate. You have a lot of mines in Peru in the Andes that burned, thousands of liters per day, firing up the trucks or the plants, or their processing plants to be able to get there. So we do think that that is a great need for the region, and we do think that it is very much necessary for all of us, everyone at this panel and other companies, as well as government, to be able to invest in this, because we do think that it would alleviate a lot of this need to invest in the transmission. And then the other technology that we are looking in North America that's very applicable to Latin America, but unfortunately not economically viable, is waste, right? Either renewable natural gas or waste to energy generation is something that we see as a sort of very obvious opportunity for all of us to be able to invest in. When you think about the fact that Latin America has 5 cities that are as big as New York City or bigger, right? It has 50 cities that have 1 million people or more, right? Yet all this garbage keeps being put into landfills, and there really is not a sort of large-scale waste to energy plant anywhere in Latin America, right? Yes, technology might be getting cheaper, but when you think about the fact that these projects have a break-even of $100 per megawatt hour produced, but yet if prices are at $20, $30 per megawatt hour, somebody needs to make up that difference, right? And you can't really charge people on the streets to pick up their garbage $70. So, either multilaterals or governments need to think of a solution to be able to drive this. But again, when you think about the millions of people living in Latin America and all that garbage going into these landfills that could be used to produce cleaner sources of energies, I think those two things are very much very relevant to us, to the region, but not necessarily easy or economically feasible.
Those are technologies where we'd have to see more innovation, as we always talk about, before it can be really commercial. But I guess you would say distributed generation and energy storage are two really important areas for you. And some of the other technologies we talked about, gas. Well, I wanted to ask the next question to Angelica. So, you talked about BP's strategy for the region, for globally. So obviously the national level context is important as well. What do you see, in terms of specific what is important for governments and national level policy in the region that would make it easier for BP to actually achieve these targets? And I also want to add on two related questions that came from the audience, which I think are related to this. One is about political risks. I give you the difficult question. What do you see as the political risks to achieving decarbonization? I think that's the other side of the coin, the policies you need and the policies you don't. And then the other question is about carbon pricing. Is that something that you see happening or would like to see? I think that's also related to national level policies. So I'll just add a little more detail on that question.
Thanks very much, Lisa. So I'll try to incorporate those questions as I answer. Like you said, I think we've answered in terms of, what's the problem and what's our strategy? What are the pillars of our strategy that we're doing? And then, after having said that, I think it's very important that we also talk about our ambition and our aims. I think, you cannot, or at least, from the BP perspective, we've set our ambition and kind of topped it down into 5 very critical aims that relate to the way we do business, and I've spoken about that. But that very basically leads into what do we need to do to get to net zero, and incorporates the fact that we need to measure everything within our operations, our retail, etc. The other part of our aims relate to the external world, which includes governments, academics, everybody else. So in terms of that, I think I'll answer the question in a framework where it includes energy security, which is fundamental for all governments. It includes sustainability, and I would say energy equity, how do we also incorporate the variable that in Latin America, we have a lot of people not receiving energy, and it's what we call in our energy outlook, energy poverty. So within that, I think the way we're thinking is it's not only about how we do business and we set and we arrive to those net zero ambitions, but it's also how do we incorporate these to the world and to all these other actors? And what are the policies that we might be needing there? So like Jean-Michel mentioned, we have to make a choice in terms of, for example, he mentioned IPI, but what are those associations and all those other independent actors that are aligned with what we are trying to achieve as companies and as countries? So to get there, I think the question is, will we get there? Because we have already 100 countries, and I think Nate mentioned 15 countries in Latin America that have already signed up for this net zero ambition. And out of the FTSE 100 companies, we have about 75% that have also signed up for this net zero ambition. So I think we are all, in the process of getting there with new technology, new education, etc. But apart from that, I think what I would really concentrate my answer in is, one is carbon pricing. I think we really need to incorporate that in all of the equation, not only for the upstream operation, but in general. And that incorporates the fact that we need to measure. And I've already mentioned that, but we really need to measure where we are, where we want to get. So we incorporate good carbon pricing into the different technologies that we are adding. The other one is CCUS. I think CCUS requires a much more in-depth understanding in terms of the economic models, the span of the projects. And we need to incorporate that and ask or request from the governments any policies that could help us, that could incentivize those parts that are really necessary. I'm just mentioning 2 examples, but I would also recall Mario. Mario mentioned about infrastructure. We need incentives to invest in those areas, that because we speak a lot around the generation and then probably the retail or the end consumer, but all the midstream requires a lot of investments and incentives. So with that, I think I will close my answer. I think that would be essential that governments start incorporating that. And maybe the last bit would be just customers. We are in BP incorporating that other area into our strategy, and customers will play a very, very critical role. So it's not only about partnering up with these companies that I've mentioned before, cement, steel, etc., but it's a lot of education around how do we also do the energy transition around demand and become much more aware and responsible around that type of consumption. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, great, thank you. My next, and I'm glad that you mentioned, I wanted to say that I'm glad that you mentioned energy poverty, because that was a question from the audience as well. You know, how when you still have many people in the region without access to electricity, many more with unreliable electricity. So, you know, how do you address that while achieving all these other goals? So thank you for that. I want to direct my next question to Julian. Electrification of many sectors is critical to reducing emissions, and this has already been mentioned. So where do you think, you know, if you look at what's happening in Latin America, where do you see progress in electrification? And what's the AES's role in that? You know, I'm talking not just about obviously the power sector, but about electrification of other sectors like transport, industry, you know, everything. And I also want to add a question, because there was a question from the audience on Central America that I think maybe you could talk more about. Just saying, you know, the panelists have mentioned that the region is very reliant on fossil fuels, but if you could drill down a bit more on what's the upside potential for renewables in countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, you know, what's the potential there, all the Central American countries?
Briefly on the Central America, what we've been doing is mostly working on using gas as a transition fuel in Central America. I mean, and trying to replace coal, not coal because there's not a lot, trying to replace liquid fuels with, and Total has been a great partner in helping those do this with gas, and really we believe that will be the solution. Well, the renewables, we've been investing in renewables, but clearly, you know, and we've been looking at opportunities to see if we can increase the space density of solar solutions, because that's an issue in Central America. So we're investing in technology with a solar company in Australia to develop solutions that will produce a lot more energy per acreage. So really help us in the Central America issue. But I think today what we're doing in Central America is mostly concentrating in replacing liquid fuels with gas, and that's still, there's still somewhere to go, and we hope to continue doing that. And we should be announcing some additional investments recently that, or in the near future, that will help. Electrification, which is an exciting process. You know, this is as somebody said, the electricity is going to be the 21st century is going to be the electricity century, and we see that the only way, or the major way, or one of the main tools to get to net carbon neutrality is to electrify areas that today are not, you know, transportation, cement, you know, building, climate control, all of that. And there are many strategies around that, many ways of looking. What we're doing, we looked at transport. We, at the end of the day, decided that it was going to be very difficult for us to enter into the infrastructure side of it. You know, the car companies could do better. The oil companies could do a lot better in terms of, you know, charging stations and all that. So we decided to go with a very different route, which was helping customers and utilities, you know, meet demand for demand for cars and for electric cars and the electricity infrastructure. So we came out with a digital solution. We're using it in the US. We'll bring it to Latin America called Motor. Essentially does that. You know, helps demand for a car. A person who wants an electric car, helps them use a car for a while, you know, for a week or so he can test it. And then connects it with not only buying the car, but with the utility. So he can ensure that he has a charging station, that he has the infrastructure, that he can get the best deal out of charging and all that. And it has worked very well. It has really reduced the complexities of acquiring an electric car. You know, you can test a car for a month or a week, you know, try it at home, see how it feels, drive it, see how the charging is, and then, you know, that's it, not necessarily that car. You can then buy the car you want, and then you can ensure that the utility will help you put the infrastructure. And for the other businesses, the main investments we're working on hydrogen. We see hydrogen as the bridge between electricity, or clean hydrogen, as the bridge between electricity and difficult to electrify industries. We believe South America has a huge competitive advantage. Huge competitive advantage. The northeast of Brazil, the north of Chile, the north of Colombia. When you looked at today at electricity prices and the way we see prices coming down, we see that these are going to be the big hydrogen pool places where hydrogen is going to be produced. They're also easily to transport or close to major demand centers. And that's our bet. Clearly, hydrogen is not ready for prime time. We know that. But we believe that there will be a cost curve, and we've been looking at this in very much detail, that is going to work out a lot faster than what people expect. And we see hydrogen playing a role very, very important in, in transportation, especially not in lightweight vehicles, but in heavyweight vehicles, in maritime transportation, probably in the cement industry, in the agricultural business, in converting into ammonia for agriculture. So we do see a play. It's a long-term bet. It's the same bet we made with batteries, 10 years ago. We made a huge bet in batteries 10 years ago that is paying out now. We are now making the same bet on hydrogen and we believe that Latin America, Central America, South America especially, it is very well positioned. Mexico too, to play an important role in this and really become the center for it. So I'll say that's the way we're looking, helping our customers, electrify their life and with digital solutions, and then coming up, investing in hydrogen with a long-term view to help electrify difficult to electrify sectors.
Right. Great. Thank you. Yeah, that would be, many things can be electrified now, but there's going to have to be a lot of new technological innovation to fully electrify. So, well, let me ask the next question to Jean-Michel. And again, I'll ask you two questions. So, we've talked a lot about gas, and as we know, gas when burned in a power plant is much cleaner than coal, than oil. But the issue of emissions can actually, change that picture completely. So I was wondering if you could talk more about these types of, directly in the oil and gas operations. What are the main plans in Latin America for reducing your emissions, things like flaring? And then the other question I had from the audience was a bit of a kind of broader question. How much of a priority do you think are you seeing with your, the countries that you're operating in Latin America? How much do you see the energy transition as a priority, especially given right now the impacts of COVID, health and economic recovery? Do you see that as a priority? Are you seeing support for efforts to reduce emissions in the country? So I'll sort of put those two questions together for you, Jean-Michel.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. First, let's be clear. In South America, Total doesn't flare at all. It's part of the policies of each country anyway, and it's part of also our internal policy. So today, I don't have any flaring of any gas produced in the Americas. What we are focusing on is the over emissions associated to the production process. And you have basically two types of emissions. One is that you have equipment on your production sites which are using gas to operate. And this is generating some emissions. So the solution to that is to change these equipments from gas usage to electricity usage. And electricity, you have two types of choices. One is that you buy electricity out of the grid to supply your own installations. And if you do that, you want to make sure that you buy green electricity, or you can develop your own power source through solar and wind. And so today, for example, in Argentina, in the central basin of Neuquén, we are going to build a solar plant to provide the electricity we need to operate our production site. And in the southern part of Argentina, which is blessed with strong winds like the southern part of Chile, we are going to build a wind farm to provide power to our installations. So that's the first thing. Then you have what is called the venting process, where we are working to reduce venting of methane, essentially, although it is still already a small quantities, by changing some of our equipment to make sure that it reduces whatever emission leak out of our activities. But today, the emission intensity of our gas production in all of Latin America is very low. We are below 10 kilograms of CO2 per barrel of oil equivalent emitted, when I think on average the oil and gas industry is at 20 or above. So we work very hard to make sure that gas is clean, or cleaner than any other fossil fuel. And it is, as was said before by other members of the panel, it is absolutely essential that we demonstrate that we are very responsible when it comes to emissions associated with gas, because gas is clearly the energy of the transition between the current situation and a full net zero situation by 2050. So there have been in the past, especially from the coal industry, which is one of the first industry threatened by the expansion of gas. There have been challenges put in the public on the cleanliness of gas, and we are responding with acts and facts, and I think we are winning this argument. Now, regarding the policies, and the success of climate change is going to be the result of an alignment between three main parties. One is the private sector, which we represent. The other one is government, and the third one is customers. Because especially customers, at the end of the day, they like reliable and clean energy, but they want it to be also affordable. And so we are going to have to engage customers so that they accept the reality of what will be the cost of the energy of tomorrow. So we have to have alignment. All countries have not been created equal. So I don't think you can speak of a regional solution of governmental policy. Governmental policies are essential in the sense that investors need clear rules that are likely to remain in place for the long term, because we are not unlikely to invest millions, billions, or trillions of dollars if the rules of the game are not clear and there's not a level playing field between all actors. So it's very important that the government takes this role fully to provide clear policies and credible policies for the long term.
That's a very important point.
The private sector, you know, we are a very simple people. When we see a prize, we go for it. So if the conditions are right, you can count on us on investing. And I want to reassure Julian, don't be afraid of Total joining the power sector. We are bringing a lot of expertise and financial muscle to the sector, so it will be good for everybody.
Thank you. Well, I think that's a good comment to end on. So I was able to give you all most of the questions from the public. We did have a lot of interesting questions, and I apologize to those who asked questions I didn't get to, but I think we covered a lot of ground, and it was a really interesting discussion. So thank you so much to all of the panelists for joining us today, and thanks to my colleagues for helping to organize this. And I hope to see you all soon at our next event. Have a good day, everyone.